Hello and a very warm welcome to Political Economy with Shweta Punj. You're watching Money Control. This week, we've picked up a topic that is on everyone's minds. As tensions between Israel and Iran escalate, there is a concern that could this blow up into a full-blown war? What are the implications for India as power dynamics between nations change? How will India navigate this crucial point of time when India has good relations with Israel and with Iran? Well, to make sense of the current scenario, I have with me someone who has worked in the government, Ambassador Arun K Singh. He has been ambassador to the United States and an ambassador to Israel, besides, of course, being with the Ministry of External Affairs, a thorough diplomat who truly understands what Netanyahu is thinking at this point and what should India be doing. Ambassador Singh, thank you so much for joining us. You know, the reason why we are having this conversation today is because of what we are witnessing currently in the world. There are two very significant geopolitical developments that are taking place. We There is a huge conflict that's happening right now between Iran and Israel, and of course, we already have the Russia-Ukraine war that's been ongoing for a really long time. So, focusing on Iran and Israel, Ambassador Singh, how are you reading into the situation for what we see right now? 3 hours ago, there were attacks by Israel on Iran. The Iranian administration has come out very strongly to say that they will not take things lying down. Are we looking at this spilling over? Are we looking at an elongated conflict between these two nations?
So, Shweta, there has been a step-by-step escalation since October 7 last year, and we have to be mindful of how this is playing out. The attack that Hamas carried out in Israel on that day, with around 1,200 people killed, 300 taken hostage, was a major shock to the Israeli system because till then they had a great deal of confidence in their own intelligence setup, in their army, and all that failed. And as the Israelis have themselves described it, that was the largest single day loss of life after the Holocaust. Now, the Holocaust in the Israeli psyche is very deeply embedded when more
Right.
than 6 million Jews were killed during the Second World War. And when I was posted there in Israel, one of the things I kept hearing was never again. Never again will we allow to happen to ourselves what happened at that time. So that's a very deeply embedded thing.
Right.
So I think from the Israeli perspective, whether others agree with it or not, and we have to understand what is motivating them. And from their perspective, they felt they needed to restore deterrence because they believe that they live in a dangerous neighborhood, they have enemies surrounding them, and if they don't have deterrence, then Israel would be challenged more and more. So one of the Israeli effort, aside from degrading Hamas or eliminating Hamas from their perspective, the capacity for governance or military attacks on Israel, is to restore deterrence in the neighborhood. And that's how you see what's playing out in Gaza. It has gone on for almost a year. More than 40,000 people have been killed. There's tremendous destruction. Clearly, international humanitarian law is being violated in a sense. South Africa
That's
has
right.
moved the International Court of Justice against Israel. The International Criminal Court is looking at arrest warrants against the Israeli Prime Minister, Defense Minister. So that's one. Now, while this was going on, the Hezbollah, for the past 1 year, has sustained a constant stream of rocket attacks on Israel because they wanted to signal to Hamas that they were not alone in this fight that was going on. And as a result of the Hezbollah attacks, almost 70,000 Israelis from the northern part of Israel have had to relocate to the southern parts of the country. They are dislocated from their homes, and economic activity there has almost come to a halt. So Israel has had to respond and take on the battle against Hezbollah, which is what they have intensified past couple of weeks, and you've seen the consequences of that. There's a ground operation going on. There's severe bombing going on. They say that almost 1,000 Lebanese have been killed. More than 1 million Lebanese have been displaced, and large number of top leadership of Hezbollah, including the leader, has been killed in this. Now, from Iran's perspective, the government that came to power in Iran in February 1979 is one of its motivating ideology is the revolutionary aspect based on religion, and they feel that they have to pursue the interests of Muslims, not just in the region, but beyond that. And therefore, as also part of their struggle within West Asia against other countries, they have been
Right.
far more strident on the Palestinian issue. And they built up Hezbollah, they've supported Hamas, they've supported Houthis to have leverage and deterrence in the region, including against Israel. So it is in that framework that when Israel took action in April this year, which ended up killing about 9 senior Iranian Revolutionary Guard leaders who were in a
Yeah.
meeting in Damascus. And from Israel perspective, they were part of the effort to coordinate attacks against Israel. When they did that, Iran felt that it was a violation of their sovereignty. Their senior leaders had been killed. And you remember the 300 drone, missile, cruise missile attacks that had happened at that time. Now, off
Right.
late, what has happened is that Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, was killed in Tehran, and Iran felt that that was a violation of their sovereignty. Nasrallah was killed in September in Lebanon. So the Iranians felt that there was compulsion on them to respond in a certain way to show
Okay.
that they were not leaving their partners alone in this. So you saw the Iranian response. Now,
That's right.
Israel will argue that they need once again to restore their deterrence vis-a-vis Iran. So as of now, the de-escalation has not happened. And as of
That's
now, we are still seeing over time, step by step, an escalatory ladder of conflict and confrontation in the region, which should, really gives cause of concern to everyone.
right. So, typically, Ambassador Singh, if we were to go back historically, when we see such step by step escalation, um, is this largely, I mean, is Iran doing this to give out a message to the world? And, but they, do you see them de escalating the situation? Or what does this mean? What does this escalation or what does this conflict really signify for Netanyahu and Israel? Do you see them backing down a little bit? And what role do you think does the United States play in this? Can the United States play in this? And historically, how have we seen such situations pan out?
So everyone has escalated. The Hamas escalated on October 7. Israel escalated after that in Gaza. The Hezbollah escalated against Israel. Now Israel has escalated against the Hezbollah. The Iranians escalated against Israel, and Israel has escalated against Iran. So everybody is escalating because they believe, right or wrong, that to protect their own interests, their role in the region, their security, they need to take the steps they are taking. I mean, so that's their perspective. And of course, there are consequences of that. And
Right.
again, if you've seen various reports, because of the action that he has taken, Netanyahu has become more popular in Israel than he was before the conflict started. Because the Israeli society, one can argue at one level that the Israeli politics has traumatized the Palestinian population in that area. But the Israeli society itself is a traumatized society because of past history, because of what they saw on October 7. So we have to factor in both dimensions. Now, going beyond that to the US has its
But
own
that,
compulsions.
sorry, go on. I'm sorry to interrupt. Yes, go on.
Yeah, US has its own compulsions because in the US, again, if you see, there is by and large bipartisan support for Israel.
Right.
Although there are voices in the US, in the Arab population, the Muslim population, in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which are critical of what Israel is doing at the moment. The Biden administration itself is critical of some of the military actions that Israel has taken. But by and large, there is support for the security of Israel. and even Kamala Harris during the nomination process at the Democratic Convention, while critical of some of the military actions, said that she's fully behind Israel's security interests. So that support is there, and I think the part of it is the compulsions of U.S. politics, because at the popular level, the bulk of support is for continuing this level of support for Israel. And if any, for example, candidates for president, either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris backs out from that, there'll be
Right.
consequences for them, for the vote they will get, the funding they will get. So they remain supportive of Israel, other than the fact that they believe that Israel, through its strong military and technology presence in the region, is something that works for US security interests.
So where does that leave India, Ambassador Singh? Because India has built a relationship with Iran. Chabahar port is so significant for us, and now with this, India has pursued this relationship with Iran, regardless of the sanctions that had been imposed by the Western world on Iran. So we've taken a very independent approach when it comes to our relationship with Iran. But what changes from here on? And I mean, in terms of India's friends with Israel, India's friends with Iran, India has been nurturing its ties with the United States. United States has been in the last few years, the relationship between the two countries seems to have grown. So just help us understand, about India's role in this, and what should India be concerned about at this point?
So, in fact, as you mentioned, Shweta, India has good relations with almost all the players involved at the
Correct.
moment.
Yeah.
We have a strong relationship with Israel. It's a very strong technology partnership. It's also a strong defense partnership. We've got some very important platforms. There's technology cooperation happening. At the same time, we have an important and also historical relationship with Iran. For example, we work on the Chabahar port, which is very important for us to be able to access Afghanistan, to be able to access Central Asia.
Right.
Before the sanctions were imposed on Iran, we used to buy an important part of our energy imports from Iran. Now, that has, of course, been brought down to virtually zero because of the US sanctions on Iran. So that India is not doing. But, of course, the Chabahar port cooperation continues. But even within US sanctions that were imposed, there is a carve-out for Chabahar port, because the US legislature acknowledged that the Chabahar port was important for access to Afghanistan and elsewhere. And there's no real sanctions on activity related to Chabahar. So, of course, India would like, from its own security and interest point of view, to sustain all these relationships. But for us, the real concern would be that large part of our energy imports come from the Gulf, from Saudi
Right.
Arabia, from Kuwait, and others, Iraq. And we have 9 million Indians living and working in the Gulf. They repatriate almost 35 to $40 billion or more of remittances every year, which is very important in terms of our foreign exchange earnings, important in terms of the families that are supported from these remittances coming in. And you would have seen earlier that when we had to evacuate a few thousand people from Sudan or Lebanon in 2006, or from Ukraine recently, it's a massive effort and a large disruption. But if the welfare of 9 million people in the Gulf is impacted, that would be a huge impact on India. So, from India's perspective, we would certainly want that there be stability, that this escalation ladder is contained, brought down, and that the prosperity of, in terms of economic activity and other things in the Gulf, continues. Aside from our bilateral relationships, India and US had announced last year in September that we will work on an India Middle East Europe corridor, from
Corridor.
India
Correct.
to West Asia, then going on to Europe. An important Indian company, for example, has a lease on a Haifa fort in Israel, which is a very important port. So we have stakes in virtually a large number of countries in the region, and
Yeah.
of course the Indian origin people. So no, our interests are very, very vitally affected by whatever is going on.
Right. So, Ambassador Singh, you, Mr. Jaishankar was your predecessor when you took charge in the Ministry of External Affairs. What do you
No,
think?
no. I took over from Mr. Jaishankar as ambassador to the US.
Okay, okay, my apologies. So currently, what if you were to give him, or diplomatically speaking, India would be pursuing multiple channels of conversations and discussions with Iran, with Israel, to bring tensions down. Is that
No, sure.
is
I'm sure the Indian leadership would be talking to various parties. India has regular conversations with the US. You would have seen the Prime Minister himself has spoken a couple of times to Prime Minister Netanyahu. There were
right?
conversations also with Israel, because it would certainly be in India's interests not to allow the escalatory ladder to continue.
Right.
Because you have seen again that the shipping through the Red Sea has been disrupted by what the
That's
Houthis are
right.
doing. Because
Yes.
and now with the tension with Iran, if there's any disruption in the Straits of Hormuz, the
Yeah.
in terms of goods, energy flows, all that would be impacted. So yeah, I think it's something that India would be watching, and then Indian Navy, for example, is extremely active in the broader Indian Ocean region.
Hmm.
Again, looking at protecting our interests. So these are areas of vital interest to us.
Right. So, going forward from here on, how do we see the geopolitics playing out? Where do we see Israel when it comes to power centers of the world? Where do we see India? Because how significant would this period be for India to emerge as a leader in brokering some sort of peace? Right? I mean, what are the options? It's United States, it's India, and what are the other options? Really,
So
they
I
are
don't think India, I don't think India can really broker peace as such. You can have
sure.
conversations, you can pass on what you're hearing
Mm,
from one or to the other, but India cannot really broker peace as such, because each of the players has their own vital interests as they see it, either national security interests or the political interests of the leaders. And if you look at
right.
Netanyahu, he's not even listening to the US president, because he has his
That's right.
own interests that he feels he has to pursue, and he believes that the compulsions of US politics allows
Mm,
him to ignore what the US president is telling him. Now, given that kind of a dynamic, to think Israel would listen to India or anybody else, that's not how it's going to work. So I think what we need to do is continue conversations with everyone. But we
mm,
also need to understand that aside from the regional contestation that is playing out between
mm,
Israel and Hamas, Israel and Hezbollah, Israel and the Iranians, there is also global contestation at play between US, Russia, and China. And
mm,
at the moment, US is seen as the only upfront, active, major player in terms of
mm,
what's going on in West Asia. But
mm,
because of their own difficulties or challenges related to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Russia has
mm,
of late built a very strong partnership with Iran. Iran has supplied missiles, Iran has supplied drones to Russia, and I'm sure they would be looking at whatever areas of cooperation that Iran and Russia would need. And similarly,
mm.
China would
Yeah.
like US to be seen as weakened. That if US is now heavily engaged in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is not necessarily going Ukraine's way, even though Ukraine has sustained and kept Russia engaged and prevented Russia from advancing beyond a point. And in the Gulf, again, if things are not going entirely in terms of what US would like, they would like de-escalation, and so that the conflict, it doesn't take the dimensions of a regional conflict. So from China's perspective, is US seen as weakened internationally, they would feel that they can pursue their interests in the Indo-Pacific more assertively. So there is this other global contestation that is playing out. And I think the other big dilemma for the US is that they're midst of an election cycle. And
Correct.
between now and November 4, when the elections take place, neither candidate would want to be seen as weak in terms of support for Israel. Now, what happens
Mm,
after November is something we'll have to watch. Donald Trump
mm,
in the past has been entirely on the side of Israel.
mm,
But Kamala Harris has signaled that she'll be more nuanced. So, whether the position of President Biden and the Democratic administration between November and January alters, nuances a bit after the elections is something we'll have to watch.
mm. Let's talk about India and China also in this. As you pointed out, there's another bloc which is US, Russia, and China. Again, Russia is again another country that India is close to. America, India, Indo-US relations have only become stronger, and the sense one gets is that America has been aligning more aggressively with India to perhaps cut China to size, for lack of a better terminology, but just ensuring that China's dominance is not does not continue unabated, and that's been one of the reasons for the increased bonhomie between India and America. So. So going forward, Ambassador Singh, how do you see these dynamics getting altered? And when it comes to India's very complicated relationship with China, because economically speaking, we are importing so much from China. Half of our economy is running on Chinese imports, which are being used, as inputs into our final products. We've increased tariffs and so on, but reducing imports from China it's going to take a long time. There are no short term solutions or short term answers there. We've seen friction on the border. We've seen China taking a very aggressive stance when it comes to India, and we've heard our Mr. Jaishankar also come back to China in equally strong terms. So just help us understand, Ambassador Singh, that with this conflict, the power dynamics between these very crucial countries, India, China, Russia, America, how what happens over there?
Yeah, so as you rightly said, we have a challenge from China, and it's not a new challenge. In a sense, it has been there from the 1950s. And as I see it, in terms of this global contestation that is playing out between US, Russia, and China, India's effort clearly is to sustain the relationship with Russia, because it's a long-term partner for India, a strong defense partner. It has given political support at times when we needed it, and at the same time deepen the partnership with the US and Europe, because in terms of the aspirations that the Indian leadership has for India as a developed nation, moving towards higher levels of technology partnership, that can only be done in partnership with the US and countries in Europe, countries like Japan. And through this, India will need to strengthen itself more and more to deal with the challenge from China. Because today's China GDP is 4 or 5 times India's GDP. The military expenditure is 4 times India's military expenditure. So you have to take yourself to another level. Now, from the US perspective, their interest in India is not just because of the China dimension. That's certainly one dimension. But also there are tremendous strengths in the bilateral relationship. US is India's largest trading partner. If you look at goods and services, we are among the top 10 trading partners of the US. US companies have invested almost $60 billion in India, the largest foreign investor. But interestingly, Indian companies have invested more than $40 billion in the US, and they have a presence across all 40 states. You would have seen reports that today there are 1,600 global capability centers in India, doing cutting-edge R&D and technology work for multinational companies, not for the India operations, but for their global operations. And 60% of these global capability centers are those of US companies. So US companies realize that to maintain their global edge in technology and innovation, especially when China is their main competitor, they need a partnership with another country like India, which has 1.4 billion people and the required human tech skilled capital. So there is a multidimensional aspect to this cooperation. I think it is in that framework that I do believe that one can expect that in a long-term trajectory, India's relations with US, France, Germany, UK, and others will consolidate in the coming period, even as we sustain the Russia relationship.
Interesting. Okay, my final question, I think, which is on everyone's minds, really, it is on this escalation between Israel and Iran. Do you see this blowing out into a full-blown war? And if that were to happen, you know, what would it imply for India?
So look, I don't think anybody really wants a full-blown war. I don't think the Iranians want. They're already living under sanctions. They have a very difficult economic situation. From the Israeli perspective, again, they're stretched in Gaza. They're stretched in Lebanon. Why would they want to take this on? The US itself doesn't want a full-blown war. It has huge challenges in Europe. It has, and the Americans have said repeatedly that they see China as the main economic, technological, and military challenge, even though they are engaged in other theaters. So they would not want. But as many have pointed out, in the dynamics of a conflict, there are very often unpredictable consequences. So one doesn't know how it will play out, because Iran and Israel would both like to signal to each other that they have escalation dominance and that they have a one-step advantage. Now, where that equilibrium settles, one doesn't know at the moment.
All right, Ambassador Singh, thank you so much for your time and very valuable insights. Of course, like you said, nobody wants this tension to escalate, and let's just hope that peace prevails above all. Thank you very much for joining us, and a big thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. Do send us your thoughts and feedback on moneycontrol.com. We'll be back next week. Thanks so much for watching.